Hey peeps, hope you're well. Thank you for popping by. Always good to see you. New Order, Power, Corruption, and Lies. Let's just keep plowing through the New Order albums, shall we? This was New Order's second album, obviously. This came out in 1983, by the way. This is the version that I have. I just looked up my own vinyl copy of this, and I have the original Quest Press, which was Quincy Jones's label here in the United States. This did come out in the United States on Factory. Factory had their own little wing of their label here in the United States, but this album came out, I want to say in May of 1983. The spring, I'm pretty sure spring or early summer of 1983. This initial Quest version came out in 1985, and I'm going to always try to show the versions that I have when I do these videos. But Power, Corruption, and Lies, man. I think a lot of New Order fans would comfortably say this is their favorite New Order album, and I would not argue with them. There's one other New Order album that I like better, that I'm completely sure that I like more than this, but this is a very, very close runner-up for me. There are a couple of other, maybe Low Life. For me, Low Life, my favorite New Order album would be Technique. I think Technique is New Order at the very top of their powers. I think they just escalated their talents to such an absurd level in 1989 with Technique that it's not even funny. But in terms of my second favorite, it would be a close race between Power, Corruption, and Lies and Low Life. At the end of the day, who cares? They're both brilliant albums. I think any given day I might choose this as my second favorite, my close second favorite to Technique. What I love about Power, Corruption, and Lies so much is it's just got everything that New Order did. And I do say did, because New Order, in my opinion, has not released a really good album in over 30 years. They just stopped. They don't have the magic anymore. And plus, they don't even have Peter Hook anymore, which I don't know how they could even call themselves New Order. I think that's a joke. But whatever, it is what it is. But I think Power, Corruption, and Lies represents every little thing that New Order did well. Everything. You get rock, you get dance, you get ballads. Some of Sumner's best lyrics and songwriting is on this album. This is a excellent piece of work. And if I were to make a list, devise a list of my 100 favorite albums of all time, this would certainly be on there. I love this album. This is such a good album. Some of it kind of sounds dated, but it doesn't matter because it's so unique. Some of it is so absurdly ahead of its time, and then there are a couple of tracks that do kind of sound a tiny bit dated, but they're also so, again, unique and interesting and individualistic that it doesn't matter. Nothing else sounds like it. Like it only sounds dated in the instrumentation and the types of instruments they're using, but they're using it in such a creative way that it sounds ahead of its time. It's This album kind of exists on its own planet. I can't think of any other album that sounds like this album, and it's a rarity. With so many people creating so much music, and it's so easy to do, and when I say easy to do, I mean create music, and the glut of releases that come out day in and day out, dating back to the 80s, I think to have an album that stands in its own rarefied air is intensely rare and very cool. And Power, Corruption, and Lies is one of those albums. It just kind of doesn't sound like anything. Totally original. As I go through this track listing, and I'm going to talk about the singles, the associated singles around this album that I think you got to talk about the singles when you talk about New Order. You can't not talk about those. You have to talk about them. They are a huge part of New Order's era because they released a lot of 12 inches that were 12-inch only, that were not on the album. In fact, the biggest song they ever released was a 12-inch only. And it came out right before this album, and I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, as I look at this track list, I mean, you have Age of Consent. To me, that's just kind of classic New Order. New Order doing their rock and roll thing. Just a straight ahead, up tempo, high energy New Order moment. But in their way, it's so unique. Sumner's vocals are so unique. The songwriting, the instrumentation, it's just a really beautiful song. And, New Order produced this themselves. Martin Hannett wasn't around anymore. They were doing everything on their own. Excuse me. They were producing themselves. This was a self-produced band at this point. And what a cover too. Who did this cover? Let's see. Oh man, I'm not even gonna. I don't want to mangle this person's name. Obviously, Peter Saville added the little touches like this here, but this is an old classic painting, really beautiful painting too, and takes on such a profound meaning when you're associating it with this, New Order. When you're listening to the music and staring at this painting, it's just all of a sudden this painting becomes something altogether different. Really exciting record. Age of Consent, again, classic New Order. This album, it represents the electronic side, the rock side, the ballad side here with Your Silent Face. I think Your Silent Face obviously is one of the most well-known tracks on here. Beautiful song. There really isn't a bad track on here. The first couple of tracks here are kind of classic New Order, and then we start getting into newer territory here with like The Village and 586. You start hearing New Order just do a full-on disco thing. And as we all know, the single that came out just a couple of months before this album was this, Blue Monday, but I'll get to that in a minute. So we already know that when this album came out, people knew that New Order were going down this new direction of basically disco, because that's what Blue Monday is. It's a disco record. That's all it is. People can define it in any way they want to define it, but at its heart, it's a disco track. That's what it is. Ultraviolence and Ecstasy kind of bleed into each other. I always thought those tracks were very similar. Again, more classic New Order, but the instrumentation is very traditional. It's very organic. You get real drums and things, but it also has this electronic feel to it. It's kind of hard to tell how they're coming at those tracks. Is it dance? Is it post-punk or whatever you want to call it? It doesn't matter. It's New Order. These two tracks kind of bleed into each other, I think. And then Leave Me Alone is one of my all-time favorite New Order songs. I think this is arguably the best song on the album, one of my favorite New Order tracks, period. And this is classic New Order. This is just the four of them in a room playing their guitars and drums and making music. This is this is a classic New Order track, I think. No electronics going on here. This is just guitar and drums and Barney's vocals, and it is a brilliant song. And this is also back when Barney was still writing really good lyrics. His lyrics of the past 30 years are just trash. I'm sorry. His lyrics are so fucking bad. Oh, yeah. It's tough for me personally. It's tough to listen to any New Order album post Republic. It's hard for me to listen to. And a lot of the reason for that is Barney's vocals. They're just terrible, man. I guess this is what happens when you get old and you've proven yourself. You don't have anything else to say. You just kind of poop out these lyrics. They don't mean anything. They're really cliched. They're really boring. I'm sorry, New Order fans, but are you going to argue this point? Barney's lyrics are shit, and they've been shit for 30 years. But his lyrics on Leave Me Alone represent a time, and basically when I say a time, I mean that 80s period, where New Order records, they always ended with a song that had lyrics that were kind of like, fuck you. I don't care how this sounds. I don't care if you don't like the ending of this album. This is the way I'm ending this album. That's definitely illustrated in their album Brotherhood. I'll talk about that soon. But the way Brotherhood ends is brilliant. I remember people bitching and moaning about how that ended, but I thought it was perfect. New Order just kind of had this tendency to drop the mic at the end of their albums and just be like, "Fuck you, we're done," and we don't care if you like or dislike the way we're ending this. "Leave Me Alone" is kind of a funny song and it's beautiful. New Order at their very essence, I think. "Leave Me Alone," just a great song, a beautiful album, man. I don't know that any New Order fan would argue this. And I would entertain any argument saying that Power, Corruption, and Lies is their finest moment. This is a beautiful album, and it only picks up steam. Excuse me, I've had this album in my life for, I don't know, 40 years now, and not quite 40 years, I guess. But it's one of those albums that just never gets old. You can keep listening to it, and it's still there for you. You might notice something you never noticed before. This is the 500th time you've listened to it, and then you're like, oh, wow, I never noticed that before. There's a detail I never heard before. What's your favorite New Order album? Is it this? I'm sure a lot of people would say that it is. Let's look at the back cover now, and let's talk about the singles. They were fashioning a lot of their artwork to look like those old floppy disks at the time. This is how people stored their information back then, those floppy disks. And anybody who's under 30 years old, you're not going to know what the fuck that means. But in the early days, you had these little floppy disks, and they had this like film material inside, and you stuffed them into your computer, and you stored tiny bits of information. Back then, it was huge amounts of information. Now it would be a total joke. But this is fashioned to look like a floppy disk, basically, and much like Blue Monday did. And again, this is the US edition on Quest. This is the version I have, so I'm going to always stick to the version I have. Obviously, this came out in the UK, and there are 5 million different releases of this, but this is mine. Yep. These are definitely the labels. This is the inner sleeve. Get some Peter Saville type goodness here. Mine has this little sticker on it. I do have that little sticker on my copy. Here's a photo of everything. Again, very iconic artwork. Peter Saville, just kind of was his thing. And as you can see, these marks right here, this is a die cut sleeve. So when you slip the inner sleeve in, you see those little black marks. That's the inner sleeve you're seeing there. When you take the inner sleeve out, that's what you see. So very cool. A very cool touch. And I know that New Order, at least initially, when they released this, they lost a lot of money on these sleeves because they're die cut. They're very detail oriented. These were very expensive to produce, and they lost money on this single in the early days of Factory. This reminds me too, by the way, they talk about this in the movie 24-Hour Party People, which I recommend to anybody. I think 24-Hour Party People is a great fucking movie. It is so good. It talks about the bands it should be talking about. And the performances are fantastic, particularly Andy Serkis as Martin Hannett. He's brilliant. And Patty Considine is amazing. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to give you any more names of who they're portraying. I want it to be a surprise. I don't want to give up too many spoilers. But if you've never seen 24-Hour Party People, go see it. It is a great movie. I was highly impressed. I wasn't expecting a lot when I first saw that movie, and then when I saw it, it's since become one of my faves. It is a great movie. I'm not going to talk about Blue Monday ad infinitum. We all know this record. The whole world knows this record. It's enough. We don't need any more commentary on this. This is the original UK version. This is the version I have, and it's backed with The Beach. The Beach is just basically a dub version of Blue Monday. This was not on the album. This is, again, back in days where bands like New Order only released 12 inches and songs that existed only on the 12-inch. They did not pop up on the albums. That happened a lot back then. And Blue Monday is one of those cases. Now, if you were in the United States and you bought like the CD version or the tape version of Mutant Power, Corruption, and Lies, you would find these tracks. I remember they plastered. For some reason, I had a tape of this, and they put Blue Monday and the Beach on there as bonuses. So if you bought that, you would have thought that these tracks, excuse me, were part of the album, but they weren't. They were not on the album originally. I mean, I guess technically, if you're in the United States and you bought the CD or the tape, they were on the album, but these were 12-inch only tracks. And here's that die cut sleeve, very reminiscent of the album, as you can see. Again, this came out before Power, Corruption, and Lies, probably a couple of months. This came out in early 1983. And this is just pure disco. I don't really care how anybody else would categorize Blue Monday. To me, it is a disco song. So imagine that. People had Blue Monday, they were still letting Blue Monday gestate. They were still digesting this track when Power, Corruption, and Lies came out. So it was a lot to take in, man. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Blue Monday and Power, Corruption, and Lies were the start of how we know New Order today. I mean, that's where they really took off. This is where they kind of became New Order. This was the record, and this was the record where New Order started. This was their formative years as a band. This was the seedling of what they would become and how we know them today, right here and right here. It is what it is. Here are the labels. Anyway, not going into Blue Monday. We all know what this track is. Every motherfucker on the planet knows this song. I pulled this up. This came out in 1988. They re-released Blue Monday, and it had some new mixes on it. This I don't know how to say his name, but John Podaker did these newer remixes, and then Quincy Jones supervised the mixes. I don't know what that means. Did Quincy Jones just hover over John Podaker and stroke his chin and look at him while he twiddled the knobs and figured out how to mix the thing? And what does that mean? How do you supervise a remix? But maybe he was just present. These remixes are okay. I don't know. They added some samples and they tweaked with a couple of things, but it really wasn't all that different. This US release is really cool because they put both versions of Touched by the Hand of God on the B-side. That was a single in the UK. That was not a single here in the United States, but it didn't matter because they put both versions here on the 12-inch. So when you buy this US version, you get both remixes, both 1988 remixes, and then both versions of Touched by the Hand of God. And then you see another big name right there with Arthur Baker. Arthur Baker was someone that they had worked with before here. Confusion. This is not one of my favorite New Order tracks. It never really has been. I've always really liked this cover. No, this did not come out in 1993. This came out in 1983. Produced by Arthur Baker. This was Confusion, or this was New Order doing a track that was just pure, pretty much just pure breakbeat, hip-hop, electro goodness. I mean, this is what Arthur Baker did. This is why New Order brought in Arthur Baker to kind of recreate that New York funhouse sound that was so prevalent in its day. And basically, it's just early electro, man. To me, this is why New Order is so cool. I mean, again, I've never loved Confusion, but it definitely doesn't sound like anything else. And you get 4 versions here. And yeah, you get Arthur Baker. There's Jelly Bean. I think you get John Roby's on here. I never thought much of John Roby, and in fact, I think some of New Order's worst singles and tracks were produced by him. I'll get to that in another video. But this is Confusion, man. This is New Order in early electro mode. This is their breakdancing cardboard moment. and if you grew up in the 80s and you know what breakdancing is, you know what I mean by cardboard. This is that moment for them. And I know a lot of people love this track and swear by it and think it's one of their best. I don't think that's true, but that's why we all have opinions. And that's why I have my channel. I get to have opinions, and I don't think Confusion is their best. I don't think it's even close. And, really, it's probably, at least sonically and production-wise, it's more of an Arthur Baker track anyway. It's never really sounded like pure New Order to me, and there's good reason for that. It's produced by Arthur Baker. Now, this is one of my favorite tracks of New Order. This is Thieves Like Us, and I love this cover too. God, this cover really invokes a strong image in your mind. And then you put the tracks on, and then it's like, oh my God. This was also produced by Arthur Baker, but this is an amazing song. Thieves Like Us would be in my top 10 New Order tracks for sure. This was a 12-inch only. This was not on an album. As the B-side, Lonesome Tonight. B-side only action here. Both tracks, fantastic. Thieves Like Us, it's definitely a dance track, but it's I don't know, it's got a lot of heart to it, a lot of warmth. It's very much a pop song, but it is cutting edge in its production and its approach. Thieves Like Us is a beautiful song, man. It's so good. Absolutely one of their best moments, I think. And Lonesome Tonight is a slower ballad, more traditional type New Order song. Excellent song. This is a beautiful single. I highly recommend anyone pick this up who doesn't own this. And I think, most New Order fans are going to have these tracks in some way on some format. One of their best, absolutely one of their best, Thieves Like Us. And then I think I'm going to show this as the last release in this video. This is Murder. This was a Belgian only release. I think it ended up being released on other formats later, but very similar cover. But look at this cover. This is just one of my favorite covers of all time. I just did a video a couple days ago on the worst covers of all time. I think this is one of the best. Look at this. Really beautiful stuff, man. Good Lord. Absolutely beautiful cover. Covers don't get any better than this as far as I'm concerned. There's so much to take in. I mean, even after 40 years of this record being in my life, I still look at this and I'm like, It invokes a lot of emotion, and you just have to stare at this image with these numbers surrounding it. It really can have any infinite number of meanings to you. Really beautiful cover. And a beautiful song, too. Murder's kind of a menacing track for them. It's very brief, but really good. And then it's got the instrumental version of Thieves Like Us. So good. Beautiful stuff here. And that is the early mid 80s era of New Order. Obviously, I'll do Low Life next. That's the album they produced after this. But we're talking about Power, Corruption, and Lies here today. How good is this album? How good are these singles? And how good is this? Think about it. Go listen to these records in comparison to anything else that was coming out in 1983. Let that sink in. You youngins out there who are listening to this and you're stroking your chin and you're like, yeah, this sounds dated. Shut up. Just shut up right now. Go back to 1983, step outside your own selfish little world, and understand that this album came out in a time where nothing sounded like it. Nothing. No thing. Of course you like this song, because this is the one you've heard a million times and you've been told that it's brilliant. But step outside that little box and listen to this and understand the power of music and how things can shape the future. This is an album that still is shaping things today, as far as I'm concerned. People are still trying to recapture what New Order did here over 40 years ago, and they haven't even come close. And that's the point. You're never going to recapture this. There's a tiny, tiny, tiny little window that this album came out in time, and it was released in that time, and that is why this album is so special. Power, Corruption, and Lies. As always, thank you very much. Goodbye.